And how rich, too, is the life of the sunny air. Every leaf and flower seems to have its ringed representative overhead. Dragonflies shoot in vigorous zigzags through the dancing swarms, and a rich profusion of butterflies, the leguminaceae of insects, make a fine addition to the general show. Many of these last are comparatively small at this elevation, and as yet almost unknown to science, but every now and then a familiar Vanessa or Papilio comes sailing past. Hummingbirds, too, are quite common here, and the robin is always found amongst the margin of the edge of the stream, or out in the shallowest portions of the sod. And sometimes the grouse and mountain quail, with their broods of precious, fluffy chickens, skim the grassy lake from end to end. Flycatchers come up and in the fitful flights from the tops of the dead spars, while woodpeckers swing across from side to side in graceful festoon curves. Birds, insects, and flowers, all in their own way telling a deep summer joy. The influences of pure nature seem to be so little known as of yet, that it is generally supposed that complete pleasure of this kind permeating one's very flesh and bones unfits the student for scientific pursuits in which cool judgment and observation are required. But the effect is just the opposite. Instead of producing a dissipated condition, the mind is fertilized and stimulated and developed like sun-fed plants. All that we have seen here enables us to see with surer vision the fountains among the summit peaks to the east. Hence flowed the glaciers that ground soil for the surrounding forest, and down the foot of the meadow the moraine which formed the dam which gave rise to the lake that occupied this basin before the meadow was made, and around the margins of the stone that were shoved back and piled into a rude wall by the expansion of the lake ice during the long begone winters, and along the sides of the streams with the slight hollows of the meadow which mark the portion of the old lake that were the last to vanish. I would fain ask my readers to linger a while in this fertile wilderness to trace its history from its earliest glacial beginnings and learn what we may of its wild inhabitants and visitors, how happy the birds and all summer and some of them all winter, how the pouched marmots drive tunnels under the snow, and how fine and brave the life of the slandered coyote lives here, and the deer and bears. But knowing well the difference between reading and seeing, I will only ask attention to some brief sketches of its varying aspects. They are presented throughout the more marked seasons of the year. The summer life we have been depicting lasts with but little abatement until October, when the night frosts begin to sting, bronzing the grasses and ripening the leaves of the creeping heathworts along the banks of the stream to reddish purple and crimson, while the flowers disappear, all save the goldenrods and a few daisies that continue to bloom on unscathed until the beginning of the snowy winter. In still nights the grass panicles and every leaf and stalk are laden with frost crystals, through which the morning sunbeams sift in ravishing splendor, transforming each to a precious diamond radiating the colors of the rainbow. The brook shallows are plated across and across with slender laces of ice, but both these and the grass crystals are melted before midday, and notwithstanding the great elevation of the meadow, the afternoons are still warm enough to receive the chilled butterflies and call them out to enjoy the late flowering goldenrods. The divine alpine glow flushes the surrounding forest every evening, followed by a crystal night with hosts of lily stars whose size and brilliancy cannot be conceived by those who have never risen above the lowlands. Thus come and go to the bright sun and days of autumn, not a cloud in the sky week after week until near December. Then comes with a sudden change clouds of a peculiar aspect, with slow crawling gait gather and grow in the azure, throwing out satiny finger fringes and becoming gradually darker with every lake-like rift and opening is closed and the whole bent firmament is observed in equal structureless gloom. Then comes the snow, for the clouds are ripe and the meadows of the sky are in bloom and shed their radiant blossoms like a orchard in the spring. Lightly, they lodge in the brown grasses and in the tasseled needles of the pines, falling hour after hour, day after day, silently, lovingly, all the winds hushed, glancing and circling hither-thither, glinting against one another, rays interlocking in flakes as large as daisies, and then the dry grasses and the trees and the stones are all equally abloom again. Thunder showers occur here during the summer months, and impressive it is to watch in the coming of the big transparent drops, each a small world in itself, one unbroken ocean without islands, hurling free through the air like planets through space. But still more impressive to me is the coming of the snowflowers, falling stars, winter daisies, giving bloom to all the ground alike. Raindrops blossom brilliantly in the rainbow and change to flowers in the sod. The snow comes in full flower, direct from the dark frozen sky. The later snowstorms are sometimes occupied by winds that break up the crystals. When the temperature is low into the single petal and irregularly dusty fragments, there is comparatively little drifting on the meadow. So securely it is embossed into the woods from December to May. Storms succeed storms until the snow is about 15 or 20 feet deep, but the surface is always as smooth as the breast of a bird. Hushed now is the life that so late was beating warmly. Most of the birds have gone down below the snow line. The plants sleep and all the high wings are folded. Yet the sun beams gloriously. Many a cloudless day in midwinter, casting long lance shadows athwart the dazzling expanse. In June, small flecks of the dead, decaying sod begin to appear, gradually widening and uniting with another, covered with creeping rags of water during the day and ice by night, looking as hopeless and unvital as the crushed rocks just emerging from the darkness of the glacial period. Walk the meadow now, scarce the memory of a flower will you find. The ground seems twice dead, nevertheless the annual resurrection is drawing near. The life-giving sun pours its floods. The last snow wreath melts. Myriads of growing points push eagerly through the steaming mold. The birds come back. New wings fill the air, and a fervid summer life comes surging on, seemingly yet more glorious than before. This is a perfect meadow, and under favorable circumstances exists without manifesting any marked changes for centuries. Nevertheless, sooner or later, it must inevitably grow old and vanish. During the calm Indian summer, scarce a sand grain moves around its banks. but in the flood times and storm times, soils washed forward upon it and laid in successive sheets around its gently sloping rim, and is gradually extended to the center, making it drier through a considerable period, and the meadow vegetation is not greatly affected thereby, for it gradually rises with this rising ground, keeping on the surface like water plants rising on the swells of the waves, but at length the elevation of the meadowland goes on so far as to produce too dry a soil for the specific mountain meadow plants, when of course they have to give up their places to others fitted for the new conditions. The most characteristic of the newcomers of this elevation above the sea are principally sun-loving gilias, eriogonae, and compositae, and finally forest trees. Henceforward, the observing changes are so manifold that the original lake meadow can be unveiled and seen only by the geologist. Generally speaking, glacier lakes vanish more slowly than the meadows that succeed them, and because, unless very shallow, a great quantity of material is required to fill up their basins and obliterate them, than is required to render the surface of the meadow too high and dry for meadow vegetation. Therefore, owing to the weathering to the which the adjacent rocks are subjective, material of the finer sort susceptible of transportation by rains and ordinary floods is more abundant during the meadow period than during the lake period. Yet doubtless many a fine meadow favorably situated exists in almost certain prime beauty for thousands of years, the process of extinction being exceedingly slow as we reckon time. This is especially in the case with the meadows circumstanced like the ones that have been described, and bosomed in deep woods, like the ground rising gently away with all around, the network of tree roots in which all the ground is clasped, preventing any rapid torrential washing, but in exceptional cases, beautiful lawns formed with great deliberation are overwhelmed and obliterated at once by the action of landslips, earthquake, avalanches, or extraordinary floods, just as lakes are. In those glacier meadows that take the places of smaller, shallower lakes, which have been fed by feeble streams, glacier mud, and fine vegetable humus, enter largely into the composition of the soil, and on account of the shallowness of the soil and the seamless, watertight, undrained condition of the rock basins, they are unusually wet, and therefore occupied by tall grasses and sedges, whose coarse appearance offers a strikingly in contrast to that of the delicate lawn-making kind described above. These shallow soils and meadows are sometimes still further roughened and diversified by partially buried moraines and swelling bosses of the bedrock, which, with the trees and the shrubs growing upon them, produce a striking effect as they stand in relief like islands in the grassy level, or sweep across in rugged curves from one forest wall to the other. Throughout the upper meadow regions, wherever the water is sufficiently abundant and low in temperature in basins, secure from the flood washing, handsome bogs are formed, with a deep growth of brown and yellow sphagnum, picturesquely ruined with patches of kalimea and ledum, which ripen masses of beautiful color in the autumn. Between cool, spongy bogs and the dry, flowery meadows, there are many interesting varieties which are graduated into one another by the varied conditions already alluded to, forming a series of delightful studies. Another very well arced and interesting kind of meadow, differing greatly both in origin and appearance from the lake meadows, is found lying aslant upon moraines covered hillsides, trending in the direction of greatest declivity, waving up and down across rock heaps and ledges like rich green ribbons brilliantly illuminated with tall flowers. They occur both in the alpine and subalpine regions in considerable numbers and never fail to make telling features in the landscape. They are often found a mile or more in length, but never very wide, usually from 30 to 50 yards. When the mountain or canyon side on which they lies dips at the required angle and other conditions are at the same time favorable, they extend from above the timberline to the bottom of a canyon or lake basin, descending in a fine, fluent lines like cascade breaking here and there into a scarce favorable. They extend above the timberline to the bottom of a canyon or lake basin, descending in fine fluent lines like cascades breaking here and there into a kind of spray on large boulders, or dividing and flowing across either side of some projecting islet. Sometimes the noisy stream goes bawling down through them, and again scarcely a drop of water is in sight. They owe their existence, however, to streams, whether visible or invisible. The wildest specimens being found here, some perennial fountain, as a glacier or some bank of moraine spring sends down its waters across a rough sheet of soil in a dissipated web of feeble, oozing rivulets. These conditions give rise to a meadowy vegetation whose extending roots still more obstruct the free flow of water and tend to dissipate them out over a yet wilder area. Thus, the moraine soil and the necessary moisture requisite for the better class of meadow plants are at times combined about as perfectly as if smoothly outspread on a level surface. Where does the soil happens to be composed of the finer qualities of the glacier detritus, and the water is not in excess, the nearest approach is made by the vegetation to that of the lake meadow, but whereas is more commonly by the case, the soil is coarse and bouldery. The vegetation is correspondingly rank, tall, wide-leaf grasses that take their places along the sides, and rushes and nodding carices in the welter portions, mingled with the most beautiful imposing flowers. Orange lilies and larkspurs 7 or 8 feet tall, lupines, senecios, liliums, painted cups, many species of minimus and penstemon, and ample boat-leaved and veterum alba, and the magnificent alpine columbine, with spurs an inch and a half long, at an elevation of from 7 to 9,000 feet. Showy flowers frequently form the bulk of the vegetation. Then the hanging meadows become hanging gardens. In rare instances, we find an alpine basin, the bottom of which is in perfect meadow, and the sides nearly all the way around rising in gentle curves and covered with moraine soil, which, being saturated with melting snow from encircling fountains, give rise to an almost continuous girdle of down curving meadow vegetation that blends gracefully into the soil level below at the bottom, thus forming a grand, smooth, soft, meadow-lined meadow nest. It is in meadows of this sort that the mountain beaver Haplodon loves to make his home, excavating snug chambers beneath the sod, digging canals, turning the underground waters from channel to suit his convenience, and feeding the vegetation. Another kind of meadow or bog occurs on deep densely timbered hillsides where small perennial streams have been dammed on short intervals by rock-fallen trees. Still another kind is found hanging down smooth, flat precipices, while corresponding leaning meadows rise to meet them. These are all three of the small pothole meadows of which is found along the banks of the main streams. Another on the summits of rocky ridges, and the third on the glacier pavements. All of them interesting in origin and brimful of plant beauty.